Everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast from the Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and so glad that you're joining us. And you've caught us now in episode 3, kind of working our way through just kind of a deepening understanding of Hinduism. And I have Nate and Mark here with us. I'm referring to them as Nate the Great and Marky Mark. Kind of protecting, I just going to feel like I should say this because I'm making these little jokes, not really giving a full intro. I mean, there's just a sense in which you guys have some real great and deep friendships with people who are Hindus, and you don't necessarily want you don't want to feel like you're talking about behind their back or anything like that, and you just kind of want to protect them. And so we're just kind of not dropping a whole lot of last names and a lot of identifying characteristics because there's what you would say, and you know, okay, you wouldn't want there to unintentionally be some misunderstanding. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like we're representing what they would want said pretty well if they were here at the table with you.
I hope so. Yeah.
There is a lot of baggage because of what we talked about, I think, in the first episode related to British rule in the past. And it's misunderstood often.
Right.
What we actually believe and who we actually believe Jesus is and our faith. And so because it has a lot of baggage, you have to walk real carefully.
Yeah. There's ways that we talk and words that we use like that are militaristic in nature and are fairly offensive that we don't even necessarily know, but we need to use in this context so that people understand what we're talking about. So
yeah, it's even like convert or
right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Baptism and conversion. And
yeah.
all those things.
I appreciate you guys, your honesty, your humility, and your desire to kind of love well. And so I just wanted to make sure, probably should have said this in the first episode. I just don't want to make sure that people, I mean, it's not just me being cute and giving you nicknames. It's
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Well, that was kind of in the what I said, but as opposed to I never introduce you and give you your full last name.
I am a little sad that you never had it in the Funky Bunch.
Well,
but I guess that would make
that's
me
what we are.
That will make me. He's Nate the Great. He's not in your Funky Bunch.
Well,
anybody's in the Funky Bunch would be me and Abigail.
That's probably true.
Right? I mean, that would be the Funky Bunch, but I don't know. I mean, we'll just, anyways. Okay. So we're kind of, we talked a little bit, just kind of breaking our minds here a little bit in that first episode of kind of just helping us think about Hinduism differently than we would in, say, a normal comparative religions class, and just thinking about the connection between culture and religion and nationality and all these things, that it's more than that. But then we did spend some time last episode. You guys did a good job of kind of helping us think more in some theological categories. Again, with all the implied, it depends, it varies, a lot of diversity, but just kind of helping us think through some of the kind of the big picture kind of meta ideas that are part of Hinduism about who we are, who God is, the problem of evil, what the solution is. And I appreciate all of that. But what I kind of would like for us to do right now, kind of in this episode, is just kind of spend some time. I think there are some things that people generally know about Hinduism, or maybe better said, we think that we know about Hinduism. And if you listen to our Mormonism podcast, I did this a little bit with Scott too. It was kind of in a more kind of a rapid fire kind of way. Kind of want to do this a little more in depth with you guys of kind of, you can just kind of help us understand to what degree these ideas or things are true or false. And so we'll start with one that we put one toe in the water in the last episode with you, Nate, is Hinduism and Buddhism. I think on the one hand, we know that they're different, but not really, though they're the same. I think that's just kind of what made it's like, it's Eastern, and it's just different. And so Hinduism, Buddhism, really the only difference is regional. So
it's true. That's what we typically think.
Right. That's what we think. And I'm giving you, I'm going to say things that we think, that people generally think. And then you get to say it's partly true, it's partly false, or that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life.
I'd say it's 90% false.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
Maybe 99.
Yeah. I mean, objectively, it's false.
Yeah.
Right.
Buddhism has a very, very specific doctrine. They both came out of the same areas, have a lot of overlapping followers. That's what most people don't know,
is that the Buddha was an Indian prince.
Okay.
So most of
the Buddha
the
was
pictures.
Hindu. So there you go. That's the extra 10%.
So Buddhism is a subset of Hinduism.
But he rejected most of what he was
okay.
coming from. So
Kind of like we're talking
there's
about with the Christians.
Right.
Okay, so he grew up, there was Hinduism, when the Buddha came to be, there was what we would call Hinduism.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
And he said, no thanks. Went east.
Went
Northeast.
Eventually.
And said, we're with this thing
It went east.
This thing that I was raised with isn't right. And something different was created.
Right.
And it's taken all kinds of different forms in all of those Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah.
I spent some time in Thailand, and I was fascinated at what it looked like practically.
Different from India.
Oh, so different. Yeah.
But still a set doctrine, still a foundational pillars sort of. Yeah.
And there's a Buddha statue. There's one in Bangkok that they changed the clothes. I was there when they changed his clothes. It was a big thing. They changed the idol's clothes.
I've never seen that.
Which, I thought that a God needs his clothes changed.
Yeah.
So it felt like a passage from Isaiah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my understanding of Buddhism is that they would describe the big picture problem as attachment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I am too attached to things. I'm too attached to people. And a real spirituality comes from a detachment from things and from people. And from what I'm gathering from what you guys have said over the last couple of episodes, that feels actually very antithetical to what Hinduism is. I want to be very attached to this river. I'm very attached to these cows. I'm very attached to my family. I'm very attached to my connections and all of these things. Like I'm not hearing anything of what you guys are saying and describing what a day-to-day Hindu is like that would even fall remotely under the category of detachment.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and I would say one of the three big questions I like to ask a lot, where did we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going?
Where did we come from?
Why are we
Cotton
here?
Eye Joe.
Yeah. I knew you were going to do that.
In Thailand, again and again and again, the answer I got back was the Buddha taught us not to think about these things.
Right.
Right.
So why are we even talking about this question? We're not supposed to be talking about this question right now. We're not supposed to be considering that. That's too...
Whereas the Hindu has all the answers, even if they're coming from mom, even if they're coming from great grandpa, and even if they're making them up, there's an answer.
There's 10 stories, and
there's 10 different stories, and they're all true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there is in pop culture, just in general. And by pop culture, I don't just mean celebrities, just kind of the pop ideas about these things that it's Buddhism becomes just a word for generic spirituality. But you really can't be a powerful Buddhist or a wealthy Buddhist because that shows too much attachment, right? And again, and maybe more people than they realize when they say, "Oh, actually, I'm kind of a Buddhist in my spirit." They probably more mean Hindu.
Probably,
yeah.
A more just kind of seeing the spiritual and the sacred everywhere and kind of pursuing the spiritual and the sacred. Feels more Hindu,
absolutely,
than at least my understanding. But at some point, we'll get someone who knows Buddhism better, and they can pull me to shreds like you guys have been.
Yeah, but many times it just means that I meditate. That I've chosen to be quiet and to try to quiet my mind and
to
press things out.
Distance myself, detach from XYZ in life for a moment.
Right.
Yeah,
but not to forego all of my desires.
I'm not trying to detach from my desires.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that's really funny, there are a lot of Buddhist monks, especially in Thailand and that part of the world, and those orange saffron colored robes that they wear are a symbol of a death cloak.
Okay,
right? But they're made by designer brands.
Okay,
and they always have nice
contrast,
sneakers.
They have incredible, really nice, expensive sneakers. And I remember the family watching this group of monks go into this ice cream parlor that we couldn't afford. And I just thought that's really interesting. Those two, to detachment is the thing. And yet, I've got a designer death cloak.
So I'm gonna phrase this next question, and it may sound like I'm being disrespectful, and I'm not being disrespectful. But by the time I say kind of what a typical American might believe about Hinduism, it may come out as disrespectful. I don't mean any disrespect by it if it feels disrespectful, because if you take a comparative religions in your world history in high school, you're going to learn about there's a whole lot of gods, and you're going to learn about something called the caste system. And our understanding of that, at least what I think I was taught then, I've learned more since then. So we'll just kind of go with that, because I think that's where most of us are, right? So you're born into a particular layer or strata, social layer level, and whatever level you're born into is what you are forever. It's what your kids will be. And there's no mobility up or down, and that you put a dot on your forehead that represents whatever particular social level or caste level that you're at. But that to some degree it was banned, but not really. I would say that is probably what a typical American would think about is a significant part of Hinduism. So affirm whatever you need to affirm from that, and then kill the rest.
The only part that the dot on the forehead.
That's what I was going to say. I
didn't know that was any identifying factor of what caste you were in.
I did go to high school in El Dorado, Arkansas.
That's true. That is very true.
I'm not going to say that my teacher was world religions expert.
I mean, one of the things, if somebody listening made the trip over and was walking down a street, a neighborhood in India, that they would be on the road, they would see swastikas everywhere. Right. And you like me, I was like, well, what in the world? Is that what I think that is? And why is it here? Because it was there first.
Right.
Because that was an idea that Hitler hijacked. So yeah, it is very much still an integral part of society and culture, even though, there are rules around it, and there have been great, movements by the government to try to help people of different lower castes have chances to move up. Mm-hmm. When you walk into a room, we would have a difficult time being able to pick people out, but a friend of mine would be able to pretty much tell you everyone in the room and what caste they fall in.
Okay.
Yeah, and I, without getting into a can of worms, I think maybe a good helpful, analogy or metaphor is with slavery in the U.S. Through the last century, where there's a period of one adjustment, and so things haven't changed that much, even though there's new laws, and so we're all trying to figure it out together. Like I'm talking, 50, 60 years ago. But everybody wants to acknowledge that these changes are good, and everybody does acknowledge on the surface that these changes are good and that things are changing. So I think that's kind of how it felt a little bit, where none of my friends really wanted to talk about it because they almost didn't want to acknowledge that it still existed, because it was like they on the surface felt like, yes, it is a bad thing that we have done away with. And even though we're all still adjusting, we just kind of want to ignore it, even though it's still there and we're still trying to figure it out.
And the ignoring of it is preventing it from fully being eradicated.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and those atop that system, I mean, they've got a house full of servants, and it's a pretty nice setup for somebody who's in one of those higher castes.
Right.
And so it's a system that's really difficult to break when you've got a billion people.
It's a functioning ecosystem. Yeah. How many pieces of it are broken, maybe, but even on the low levels, it's hard from, I think, just a human standpoint to view yourself differently. It's not like the government can just say, you are now different and you believe that. So there's all kinds of levels to, I think, how hard it is to.
So there's theoretically in India now, theoretically is social mobility.
Right.
But practically,
right,
there may not be.
Right.
In the same way that one could say people who are experiencing some of the hardest conditions in America in some inner cities, they theoretically could go to college, get a job, get a master's, become an accountant, But practically, the likelihood is really, really small, even though it exists in theory.
And anytime I've talked, absolutely. And anytime I've talked about it with my friends, it seems like we digress into complaints about the rules that the government has made because the rules are broken.
Okay.
Because it doesn't really, people aren't really mobile.
And because it is tied into the belief system. I mean, that's the thing that makes it really dangerous. Believing and having been taught from the time you were a child that you are superior.
Right.
Okay.
Or that you are inferior. That's hard to break, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And so maybe this ties into the next one, which is our understanding of what reincarnation means in a Hindu context. I think we all understand conceptual reincarnation is when you die, you come back to life as something else. In a Hindu context, again, this is just a very surface level, what some people probably think. Like if I am good, whatever good means, then I will be reincarnated up a level, right? So if I was in caste 1, maybe I can come back in caste 2 and work my way up. If I'm bad, I'll either go down a caste, or if I'm really bad, then like a tree or a bug or a pig or something like that. And then one has to experience some time as some lower form to then work your way back up to person. And so there's kind of like, again, beyond just the normal caste system, there's an extended caste system that goes all the way down to gnat. And you can be reincarnated as a gnat. And maybe there was time several generations ago I was a gnat. Is that a fair representation of what reincarnation is?
Yeah, based on my conversations, yes, best I can understand it. Honestly, when you brought it up, I realized that it just didn't come up that often.
Yeah, I was about to say I never really talked about it that much,
which is interesting because it does seem like it would be such a focal point,
right?
But yeah,
it's interesting that you say that because when you're describing a funeral in previous episode, a funeral has no tears because death is part of it. And my brain immediately went to that. It's like, well, I'm not crying because this isn't the end.
Right.
So they believe it, but they don't talk about it? Or it's just like...
I think whatever happens in the next life, there's going to be a next life and a next life and the next life and the next life. And, there's not that feeling of an ending.
Okay.
Right. Well, and
There's
whatever it is, I don't think it's the reincarnation that's driving as much of the fear as maybe family duty and station in life and what social expectation there is. I would say that's probably more what's driving a lot of the religio-cultural practices. But yeah, it's interesting. I would say what to your question, true.
Right.
But also I have a friend or two that during certain festivals, we take the food that has been fed to the idol and we take it upstairs to the roof because it is still physically there on the plate and let the birds eat it because the birds are the ancestors. So grandpa and his father and that's a positive thing in those contexts, at least. So it's a little bit curious because birds somehow is not, those crows are somehow not a negative thing.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
So I know this is probably a very American high achiever question to ask. Is there an end game to reincarnation? Like I finally end up at the highest strata of the caste system and I'm really good at that. Do I eventually kind of get released from the cycle? I feel like you hinted, now you hinted at something like that at one point. Do I eventually get released from the cycle and then get to experience some sort of next level consciousness or some kind?
Yeah, the word I heard most often for this was mukti, which was a breaking of that system and this oneness with God. We would easily use that as a term to also mean what it would look like to be right with God again.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think there's different maybe iterations of the same, I'd say yes to that question. I think there's probably a million different iterations of it or what it actually means to a specific person. And even one time I was being described to me as a wheel, and I don't remember if it was the chakra or if it was something different, but the wheel, whatever the wheel was, had the different layers. So it was less of a ladder, so to speak, and more of a concentric circles thing where then you're free from this spinning wheel. So yeah.
So more like you got a pencil and you start drawing little bitty circles and you kind of get bigger. And eventually, the inertia takes over and I get spun out completely.
Right, like the thing on the playground. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, come on now. I didn't think you were old enough to even know what that was. We used to almost die on those things.
Exactly.
All right. So here's my last one, and which is the idea of karma. And so here's the way that when we say, hey man, that's karma, here's how we use it. And so how an American describes what they think karma is, you can help us understand more from a Hindu. So to use an example, you're watching a video and you're like, Karen in the parking lot gets karma. And so you see this woman, she's yelling at somebody in the parking lot of Target or whatever for not parking right or doing whatever. Then she gets in her car, drives off and hits a post and wrecks her car. And that is karma. She did something bad, and then something bad happened to her. That is what Americans call karma. And we think we got that from Hinduism. I don't know if I have a well-formed question here, except to say, what do we think about it?
I would say most of my Hindu friends, definitely this idea that what I do, if I treat others well, I'm going to get treated well. If I do mean things to other people, mean things are going to be done to me. If I cheat, then people are going to cheat me. That practical idea of karma, I don't know that I heard many people actually use the word karma, but in practice for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think I did, mainly because maybe I'm part of a slightly younger generation and my friends are on Instagram all day. And so they're seeing the same video of Karen. And so they're using the same vernacular.
Right.
But to your point earlier, I think, and maybe this was in an earlier episode, but the whole thing with I'm not going to harm the earth, I'm one with everything, I'm dependent upon these things, I'm worshiping them, I'm paying my dues to creation and whatever else. I think that's all seems like part of it on a much deeper level than just what happens in the parking lot. It's me doing what I'm supposed to so that I can continue receiving.
Okay. So, Mark, what you described, I feel like is more just kind of a general social principle. If I'm nice to you, you are in general going to be nice to me. If I treat others well, people will in general treat me well. I think most people think of karma as like an actual force that is either personal or most likely an impersonal force that exists in the universe that is making sure those things happen. That is, in fact,
the arbitrator. Yeah,
making that woman's car crash into the pole. That's not, she was mean to somebody and then somebody else came. Like, you see that too. You see those karma videos too. You know, I take a swing I call somebody a bad word and I take a swing at them and then this other person comes in off screen and just levels them, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you're talking about. But like, is there a force in the universe that is also making impersonal acts of karma happen where, like, I lost my keys today, and because I was fussing at my spouse about how they're always late, and then now I lost my keys and I'm late, and karma hid my keys. Whatever karma is,
I don't know.
Yeah, because everything feels spiritual in India. I mean, that's one thing I love about it. You know, it's very difficult. They don't have the separation between the secular and the spiritual that we seem to want to build and live in. And so, yes, the idea of karma is connected to something that's a cosmic force. Also, the fear related to it that would drive someone to live that out means that they believe it pretty, that it's not just coincidence.
Right.
But there is a force that's making these things happen, for sure.
Regardless of the nature of that force, it is true. So we should live as if it is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And it may happen this afternoon, or it may happen 10 years from now, or it may happen
in the next
generation from my family, my kids, but it will come back to me. And that's the reason.
It's not an idea that I choose to believe in. It's a supernatural, objective truth that regardless of what I think about it, it is governing something of my life.
And that's the reason in many ways, devout Hindu families are very moral.
Okay.
Can be trusted. Because there is this belief that, as guests in their country, man, I think Nate would say this too. I mean, we were treated like kings.
Well, the phrase that they say is "guest is God." It's a common phrase in Hindi or maybe Sanskrit. That's Atiti Devo Bhava, guest is God.
Okay.
And even namaste. It's I recognize the God in you.
Yeah, the God in me greets the God in you. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to wrap up here and then just spend the last episode just talking a little bit about more practical advice about how to love Hindus well if we happen to come across any or there are any in our circle. But before we get to that, I just want to make sure that is there anything in your head that you wanted to say about Hinduism or like, and I never asked a good enough question for you to say it, but there's like something that you feel like is really important for us to know or understand or appreciate about Hindu culture that you have not gotten an opportunity to say? There's no pressure. You don't have to say anything, but if there is, I don't want to miss out on something really important because I didn't craft enough good questions.
We covered a lot. I think that the beauty of Hindu culture,
right?
There's just a lot of beauty in it that gets missed by most believers because they assume that weird things that are weird to them that are different than what they're used to are just automatically bad. And because idol worship is around it, there's so many things that just get thrown out that if you really get down to the core of it are really beautiful things, a beautiful people, and there's usually reasons. The things that are crazy there's usually a reason. We won't get into toilet paper, but there's some beautiful things that we just don't understand.
Well, I was going to say the same exact thing, and I think we have a lot to learn. And my main soapbox to answer your question is going to be in the next episode, but I was going to say the same thing here that, I mean, there are Hindus that do hospitality, for example, much more, I think, like Jesus did than I am naturally capable of or than my culture does. And so there's just a lot to learn.
That's really good.
Yeah, community.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Well, I will spend some time kind of talking about kind of what the emotional and physical response should this to be for us as people. And maybe just, I can just kind of phrase some awkward questions kind of around what I think a lot of Christians, what their perception is about Hinduism and how that makes them keep at a distance. And you can kind of help disarm some of those things. So again, thank you guys both for everything that you've been sharing with us these last few episodes. Appreciate you guys a ton. Appreciate you guys who are listening. Come back for one more as we're kind of just going to wrap up kind of with some more practical things about how to love Hindus well. And as always, we would love for you to be a part of our church. If you're not local or far away, you can find us at thegrovechurch.org/connect, and you can figure out services in person or online. Either way, we would love to connect with you, help you, pray for you any way that we can. So again, I'm Charlie Lofton, lead pastor there, and thanks for joining us.